Interesting if you did this from a perspective of like if they had to do this in French instead of in English, you know. So I don't know. Do you think that would work?
Well, I guess it depends on the level, right?
Right,
you know, 100, 200 level.
Right, right. So that's also something that I want to know, right? This would work if the level is like high enough, yeah.
And we have an activity like this where basically everybody presents about their own country. So there's delegations of kids from the different countries. And so it's either it's, you know, with them giving a presentation or with everybody else giving stereotypes of what they know about those countries. And then
Someone else has the one stereotypes.
and, and then they like basically say what's true, what's not. And so there has to be a level of trust kind of established in there because otherwise it's like, for America, what they put up is guns, fat people, McDonald's, you know, like, Mickey. Yeah, I mean, Disney. Yeah, like it's essentially the president, whoever that may be at the time, you know, like, you know, so they'll put all that up and they'll be like, well, you know, not all of us are XYZ. And so the kids realize that the stereotypes they may have of other countries are maybe also surface level. So I think it's a really valuable activity. I just think, like, especially for, again, my German classes, I had maybe 1 or 2 international students, and so that would really be putting them on the spot to have them present about their own country.
I think this works great in a second language context, but not in a foreign language context as much.
Right.
Because, I mean, mine, I know that I may have, I mean, we could talk about ancestry and stuff like that at that point, but they don't have necessarily the first-hand experience to do it. Also, in a class on syntax that, sorry, not the goal, so.
No, that's what I'm looking for.
In my class.
Yeah, but I like the idea of having them take it and representing something, but at the same time, I think you have to really caution them against perpetuating the stereotypes that they
And representations, yes.
Yeah.
I think that most of the students really don't have preconceptions.
Really? Okay.
Preconceptions about the countries they might be representing.
Yeah.
They're, doing Senegal. They may not really know enough about Senegal to have even the stereotypes of what someone from Senegal would be like.
That's true.
Do you think that would work if there were no international students in that class and only domestic students, and we switch this into talking about different places they're from in the US to like have the diversity of the domestic cultures?
But even at that, I mean, here the large majority of students are from Michigan. And not just from Michigan, from like greater Detroit area, urban areas. So it's still very monolithic in a sense, I think.
Yeah. There might be some interesting things you could do with like regionalisms as far as, you know, saying bubbler instead of water fountain and all that kind of stuff.
And the pop thing, I will never get this.
Pop and soda.
The pop and soda.
Because it's pop. So. And then the next question is, what kind of code? That's what Matthew said to me.
I always use the wrong words. I would say like, I would like a fizzy drink, please. And people are like, you would like what? A fizzy drink.
Yes, this isn't Harry Potter. Sounds like something from Harry.
Sorry, my cause actually. So what I put on here is that I think it's hard to tell the difference between what is instructions to instruction.
I read it somewhere, but I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, maybe in some regions, because you know we have a lot of regional words. But
So,
Where are these supposed to go in here?
Yes, on the assessment. Yeah.
so here?
Anywhere you want to put it. I was searching really hard for those that would have the middle option, because you usually only get a happy or a sad face.
And so, concretely, draw this, reflect, map out, write briefly,
About 6 minutes. Yes. We'll be talking together. You can just share with all of us if you want later. Oh yeah.
No, I only want to pick the next. Should I share first?
Absolutely.
Maybe first.
Okay, you go away, you'll hear.
Oh, you
this
read all of
later.
this? Okay.
So they were saying, okay, I came from small town Michigan in the UP, and suddenly I'm on Michigan's big campus with all these people that speak different, I had to adjust my practices, and I had to make new friends, I had to figure out where everything
Is there a typo? Yeah. Great. Thank you. Yes, there might be quite a few. Thank you for catching it.
Realize that if you have a less commonly taught language and the associated culture, are there going to be some politeness, taboo question?
I know that the students know that what I'm about to say is not true. Like at an intellectual level, like I know they know what I'm about to say.
A question that's.
But it's almost like you just throw that out and
No.
reality doesn't make
That,
different.
you know,
What that is,
someone
that
but
for them, I would really say that they have this idea that friendships don't really away by the fact that
And I noticed something in relation to that, that's sort of
I was like, no, the little kid was talking French.
And that's why I say, I know that intellectually they know that, but there's sort of this hump thing to get over, you know?
I think that's also why we teach this, is that when you talk to a teacher, they know that. They know that that's dumb to think that people don't really live in the language. Yet somehow there's this underlying, yeah, we write this language adjustment, and they don't want to.
I also think it's a very good way for international students,
So
including
what can you do?
visiting scholars from
What I talk about a lot is how do you create a situation
before they go.
know the real world. I mean, each local community has to know the real world. Otherwise, you don't have inside.
About 3 minutes left.
So you know the CVRP, the Community Volunteers for Innovation Programs, they have something they call home visits, which is very nice because it's, you know, it's very friendly, you know, because these are many. How did they get university or somehow?
Because you could see an artifact and you could project anything onto it. So at what point do they understand really what that artifact is about?
Into their home, so they can actually see.
I see that Chance asked their specific questions. I'm not sure if that's the point at which.
So, you know, that's certainly. People are doing this kind of
very city of a new culture. For me, I participated in one activity, I don't know, maybe sponsored by the VIP, to visit a local.
One of the dangers here is that it could like rely heavily on stereotypes, especially if they know that people come from one culture. I don't know if it's clear. Students are told these all represent one particular culture.
So after I really visited there, yeah, I know they have their different special programs. And one thing I would like to ask about
Anything that has like cultural differences, and we found in the literature, someone so this idea, like all cultures are 7 categories. So
Applied linguistics. No. Applied linguistics.
view it. Yes.
But also they know what the context was, which was Belgium.
project
Yes.
for the students.
It was a great program.
Survey after the project.
Talking more about what they thought, and of course, like highlight how it's different from
One guy.
So they have
yeah, the context.
they pick up the language, but also some new concepts about the culture.
So, yeah.
I think I'm hearing some cool things that I wish you guys could share with everyone else. So let's talk about some of those. Everybody has different sets. So if you're talking about an activity, if you could like briefly just say what it is that you're talking about, because the other groups will not know, right? Actually, maybe I should say that I actually came up with this idea for the project as I was looking into my dissertation, and I wanted to collect data at different colleges at MSU, and I went to talk to people who either are advisors to international students or work with international students, and they were all saying that this is something they would like to see in practical ways, some sort of activities and some sort of help that someone could just give them, and they could just like use it in a class, or maybe not in a class, but in some sort of bonding event when they have the beginning of the semester with international students. So a lot of them were saying that they are struggling with those kinds of things, coming up with those ideas. So I thought, let me try to see if there is a way to develop something that would work for not just language teachers, but also people who deal with international students in other capacities, like advisors and people working at international center. So yeah, and also myself as an international student, I think I've been always having troubles ever since I moved here, and I also studied in England before, when people tell me that because I'm in England, I need to become English now, and because I'm in America, I have to do everything like it's done here, and I rebel against this because this is all against who I am and my identity, and I feel like there should be some middle ground and some third space developed by the professors and teachers and the students, instead of like forcing people to behave like whom they are not, So that was kind of also where it stemmed from, and was something that really mattered to me when I was thinking about this. Anyone has something that they would like to say? You guys were talking.
Yeah, we discussed a lot, but we will start with the local community field survey activity. So if you didn't get to this activity, it's
They didn't have it. Only you had it. Mm-hmm.
Oh, okay. So students, so this is an activity, kind of a project-based, like you said, it's like project-based language learning, where you send your students out to go get some data, and in this case, they're going to the local community and collecting some information from the people about various topics, like their way of life, basically. And then students would come and compile a report and probably present in class later.
So I told them that this activity sounds good for international students who might come from, let's say, China and coming to learn English in the US. But in my case, I'm a teacher of Swahili and my students are American, and finding a Swahili community for them might not be possible here in the US. It might be possible, but very difficult. So I just noticed that the activity might not be very suited for my classroom, but it's really good for the international students learning the language in the target culture, be it my students going to Kenya and studying Swahili from there. The pros for this activity are that it exposes students to the authentic culture of the people. So, of course, meeting Americans out there and interacting with them is more authentic than just being told in class, this is how Americans behave. But the cons would be, I was wondering, so would the teacher help the students would the teacher maybe connect students with the local community? Because we cannot just assume that all students can easily connect with the target community. Like we mentioned, some students come here and they stay in their groups. Like I say with my Kenyan friends, he stays with his Chinese friends and they never even get to make American friends. So would there be logistics that would need to
Yeah, this actually came from one professor who's doing this already at James Madison College. She teaches a class that is about the history of cities, like what is behind the cities, the meaning of the city. And she has a very similar project where she sends the students to a part of Lansing and she's asking them to like just go and spend a day there and observe the people and just like write what you saw, kind of like a qualitative version of an observation when you go to the field, which I thought was really cool. And they do a lot of things like that, and she links them with specific communities that she really thinks would be of interest to them and would be like really great for them to, they go to like a specific museum that she has links to and things like that. So yeah, obviously teacher would have to be the one that tells them where to go and like, you know, have some sort of arrangement for this, yeah.
Yeah, but we thought it's a great activity.
Okay, thank you.
We looked at two different activities. I'll go back to the first one since we talked about that one more. It was, oh my goodness, country. There we go. It was called Country Talks. And so students would give talks about their own countries. And there would be a summary discussion, and then they would be able to go around and ask questions about the different countries. They can so if students are from the same country, they should work together on the presentation. There's a suggestion that if it's a language class, that the teacher might want to talk about errors that were made and discuss them further up. But they'll talk about the different countries that are represented in the class, things like that. We talked about how this might be more appropriate for a class where learners are from many different cultures, because in a lot of foreign language classes you may have a few international students, but either they might all be from the same place or something like that, so you wouldn't have the variety. So the suggestion came up of maybe having them research different cultures and present on them. And so you might be able to choose countries that maybe they don't have any preconceived notions about, so they're not perpetuating stereotypes. And yeah, so we said that without significant modification, it wouldn't necessarily work as is in a foreign language class right away, but that it's definitely an interesting one to get them thinking about what is, what are our impressions of different countries right away.
Someone also at James Madison suggested to me that if there are no international students, then they can potentially ask the domestic students to present their own cultures, domestic cultures, because it's supposed to be plural in any kind of context. You guys said that oftentimes they would come from similar places and there might not be that much of a diversity as well to represent. But I think this is also something that is missing, because when I imagine this kind of activity, oftentimes either it is targeting the international student and the domestic student has nothing to do. So it's either the international student presents information about their own country and the domestic students are watching, or the other way around. The domestic student is presenting the information about their country and the international student is watching. So for me, I try to link the two and make sure that both of them have something to do in those activities. So if there is an international student, they would present something, and also domestic students would have to present something. So there is this kind of element of that space where there is exchange happening, instead of just like, I'm going to tell you about my life and you're going to tell me about your life, you know, where there's, I mean, this creates opportunities for actual that space, instead of just having this wall when I'm just telling you how it is where I come from and you tell me how it is here, and that's it. So the idea is that they would kind of be meeting halfway, you know, whenever they are doing either of those activities. But of course, in some contexts, that wouldn't work, right? Like you said, someone is teaching a class at James Madison on immigration, and whoever had the family sheet with a family tree or family life, something, they said they would really adapt it well to like the immigration idea, like showing different types of families, and they could really extend it onto the immigration class, which I thought was really cool, because I would have never thought about this unless the professor who read this said, oh, I'm going to use this like next year, because this is like a cool opening. I could use that for, so I thought this was really, really nice. I mean, sometimes those things you can't even think about how a person can use them unless then they find you know, a use for it, right? So, yeah. Okay. Anything else that we have?
A little about this one. This is about stereotypes, and well, certainly I feel that it's a super, super important topic to discuss. And one of the things I was talking about with Amanda was that, you know, teaching French, we don't get very many international students in our French classes, although we are getting more. But the majority, at least at the 100, 200 level, are American kids who studied, you know, in high school. But, you know, leading the study abroad group to France, certainly this comes up. So certainly it's an important topic. I read the first sentence of the thing and I was a little concerned, and it says, students engage in stereotyping each other and then talk through the causes and effects of stereotypes. And that kind of sends up a lot of red flags for me. And what's interesting is I think that sort of both the pros and the cons are really two sides of the same coin in this one, right? So it's one thing to sort of talk about stereotypes and what they are, but other topics here, other tasks here, on the back, I think it says, where they have to ask for different stereotypes of other people. I think the problem is, you know, the two problems with this are that because a lot of stereotypes sort of, when you start scratching stereotypes, you start getting to sort of underlying racism, and that can have a lot of potential problems in a class if the teacher is not prepared necessarily to deal with offensive things that people may say, who may not even realize that they're being offensive, right? Because these things sort of tap into these internal values and beliefs, which may in fact be quite racist, and people say them and you're like, oh, I didn't know that, but you know, people are kind of offended. But the other problem is, I think the sort of the flip side of this is, some of them are so innocuous that it doesn't really get at the actual reason why we're talking about stereotypes. So things like, you know, Americans drive big cars. Well, we do. You know, there's nothing particularly controversial about that. And I think to simply stay on those, like as an example, to stay on those kinds of topics, like Americans think everything's the best, drive big cars, wear cowboy hats. You know, I mean, those are almost cartoonish in a sense, and they don't really get at why stereotyping is bad. But if you start getting into those issues, I think you run into a lot of potential problems. As I said, especially if either the teacher or the students aren't really emotionally or maturationally prepared to handle, you know, me saying something incredibly offensive, you know, and then people get upset, as opposed to saying, well, why do you think that? You know, I think it has a lot of pitfalls.
This was something someone else raised when we did this at James Madison. They said this is one of those activities where either you need to be very confident as a teacher in doing this, in even using this, or you would feel like you yourself, like the way you speak, like you would be sure that the way you speak in class has no prejudice behind, and you will not, like you said, you would not offend anyone, like you can be sure of this in order to use this kind of activity. They also all mentioned that this is very important, and those issues of stereotyping come up all the time in a lot of discussions that they do. They have a lot of like humanities classes over there that they do lots of discussions on. Like the person, my mentor over there in the fellowship is actually a person that teaches Asian American history and cultures, and also the immigration class, and she says those topics come up all the time, and sometimes it is very tricky to like deal with them. So that was my other question, because when I went to some of the other colleges to ask, like look for potential fields of data collection for my dissertation, I was always asking whether there was any training provided. So I wanted to find different sites where I could potentially collect data in a place where, okay, the assumption is the people who teach here should be trained. Then another place, the assumption is they probably were not trained, because no one really like thinks about this in this particular college. And then the third one, they might or might not have been trained, right? So I wanted to get the breadth of potentiality of different types of trainings. And they were saying, and I was shocked that the college that has the biggest number of Chinese students, the person that talked to me, he said that they had like one training, and every time there was a training for faculty organized, people either don't show up because it's not, you know, compulsory. It's just like if you want to come and learn something about this, so like how to work with international students, we welcome you. People either don't come, and then they come to that person who is responsible for the relationship with international students and complain and say they don't know how to handle classes, and they have those kinds of issues pop. And then, you know, so, and then he was saying that the stereotypes are actually, this is a very big issue that they're dealing with at this moment, especially as the numbers of Chinese students are growing and that kind of overtaking the domestic students even in certain majors. So this was interesting to me as well, to like see that like you have an assumption that those people work with international students, so they must be trained, right? Like they must know how to do this, but it's not always the case. So I mean, I've also approached this from the institutional point of view, because I think like institution like this should at least have, did you know, I had no idea, I just learned about this last week, and I've been working on interculturality for the past 3 years. There is an office on campus which has intercultural in name. It's something interculture and inclusion, right? And then I emailed them 3 times, heard 0 times back. And then I went there and I said, you guys have those, they have this, what's it called, intercultural dialogue kind of thing, when they have grad students being kind of like facilitating certain discussions with the undergrads. I had no idea this was happening, and I think I'm pretty good at doing research, you know, online, searching for things like that, and I had no idea this was happening. So I thought this is really another thing to mention, is that, I mean, institutionally, you know, like certain places should be actually focusing on things like that, and they are not, and then other places might be for whatever reason, or might not be for whatever reason. So I don't know. This one, someone mentioned to me already before that this would really have to be either at the end when the culture is already established and everybody feels very comfortable talking about this, or you have to be very skillful in conducting this kind of discussion, because it can really go bad real fast. So, yeah.
I think another way of looking at it, I certainly wouldn't wait until the end of the semester to work on that issue, but it's very, very blunt, the way that it's so explicitly going at stereotypes, because nobody wants to hear that they have stereotypes. They don't want to believe that they are misjudging someone. They know better. And so it's exactly like Matt was talking about with people who, I mean, intellectually you're there. Intellectually you know that you shouldn't be making stereotypes and that you should be open-minded and all these things you've been hearing your entire life. But in terms of what's actually playing out, then that may not be happening. And so if you go at it in a way that breaks that open before you start labeling it as stereotype, then it creates space for more of the transition that you want to happen, which is that they become better at perspective shifting, and that they become better at seeing commonalities across what looks like 2 disparate situations. And that even just thinking critically about the way something is presented to them, that all of those things can happen, and if those things are in place, they will inoculate them against stereotypes in a way. But how do you break open enough space for that to happen? And so starting out with images and saying, here's an image. I'm not telling you it's an image of a stereotype. I'm just saying, here's an image. And I might give different images to different groups and say, look at this. What first comes to mind? And then what's another way you could interpret that? Or you might give a different frame around the same image. Or you might, and see if they interpret it differently, so different titles. Or you might do, we do one where they have to go out and find what they think is a sort of a cartoonish, stereotypical representation image of their own country, and then another one that they think breaks that open, that's contrast. So if you were doing Russia, for example, you would say something very a picture that you think is stereotypical, or is very, reducing the country to the minimum of complexity. And then you have that image, and then you have something that's very complex, and you bring that and say, look at these two images. And at that point, you're not ever saying stereotype. You're just saying, look, this is oversimplification, and this is complex. Or you say, and then, but even sticking much closer to the plan that's here, if you start out and say, stereotype your own country, and then see if people hold those or why they think those are there, then that would be safer than having them stereotype each other's countries first. But there's that one, and then there's the, anyway, I have suggestions about several of them, but also, as you were saying, that things should be multiple, that they're always multiple everywhere, and that you can, and you were bringing this up, like if you have them, and they're mostly domestic students, then they can be comparing their own experiences. So like if you're talking about the first days in country, and you want to have them break down the first days, then you have a wonderful opportunity there to have them reflect on their own first days at Michigan State.
Right.
And so everybody's first days at Michigan State are a culture shock in one way or another. And so if you get them to think very concretely about that and break that down, and it's not just how you felt, but like what was weird about, what did you have to understand about people, about places, about routines, about rules, and you get them to really lay that out in particular ways, they'll start to see how similar it really is across these different backgrounds. And so that kind of thing where the more concrete you are with the detail, the more that you give them something to build on, you get them to, you elicit more concrete responses, then it gives them more of the foundation to work with, to see those commonalities and see the perspective shifting and have them build the skills. I was told that International Center does sort of a training or event for international students. I was told this by a Chinese student. I never took part in this. I even never knew about this. I don't know, Maggie, if you've heard about this, like when you're a newcomer and you have like adjusting to, like, which I hate the word, but adjusting to the American culture kind of, this kind of like orientation thing for us. I think grad students, we only have to like watch a video before we move here, and like this kind of like goes through D2L or whatever later on, right? But a lot of undergrads, they have to go through this. And what I heard, they told me that oftentimes, so I said, what was it? And they said, oh, it was just like what you should and what you shouldn't do. So that was, I was like, what? How can you, what? How can you create another dichotomy, like what you should, what you shouldn't do? It's like you can read about this on Wikipedia, like what you should and you shouldn't do. So again, I thought, hey, this needs to be more, I mean, there's nothing is black and white, in those kinds of spaces when we have people coming from different cultures. So I thought this was, oh, I should really go there. Maybe next year I'll try and like attend the event and see what's happening there. That's what they said. They said there were like rules. They were telling them rules, like, and there were like skits or role plays that they had to present, and they were having situations like we had this kind of training, I don't know if you were there, for when you're becoming a TA and you're an international student as a grad student, you have to go through like 3-day workshop that is created by grad school, and they have lots of role plays when they would like pretend to be an American undergrad, and he was like really nasty to you and like sitting like that and saying, so you gave me a 3.5 and I need a 4.0. So how can we solve this issue? Like they would, like you have to, like, deal with the situation. I'm telling you, you have to deal with the situation. It's like your orientation, like that's what they orient you to do. So that really also shocked me. I mean, that was kind of helpful because maybe some people don't know, if you don't have any experience teaching, you wouldn't know that.
Yeah, I think that's the required one. I think it's Title 9 or something where sexual misconduct.
Yeah, there were like a lot of situations they were showing, like you're going to be dealing with this. So instead of like, I don't think that this particular thing was actually showing them you're going to be dealing with this. It was like, don't do this. If you want like American people to like you, don't do this. That's what the guy told me that I spoke to. He said, they told me if I want to be like more American, I should not be doing that and not be saying that. That really hurt me. Personally, it hurt me because I thought.
They should probably give the Americans the same list. So you know what to do.
Well, that's the thing.
But that's my point, right? It doesn't work both ways. Yes, that is the problem right now. Like my feeling and what I'm, like the research I'm doing, what I'm seeing through the literature is that it is one way still, very much one way. Like the adjustment, the accommodation, the acculturation, all the terminology that's there, right? It only works one way. Why? Why do we treat international students as at a deficit? At the time when they come here, they bring such a diversity of so many things, you know, language-wise, culture-wise.
In any situation, you can find the power differential, and the one that's holding power doesn't realize that they are holding power. The one who doesn't hold power knows. They're paying attention. They recognize that they're suffering from it, but they're alert to it. The one holding power isn't going to go looking for answers. Isn't going to go looking for. I mean, unless something else stimulates it or something else. You know, they're in a situation where they say, okay, well, I have power over here, but not power over here. So, oh, that's what that probably feels like. You can unsettle it.
I'll give you another example. So I'm teaching a class this semester, one of the 2 classes I'm teaching, and I had an instance when a student kind of semi-threatened me in an email. And I didn't know what to do, so I wrote to my professor and I said, what would you like me to do about this? And he said, well, between me and the police, there is really no one. So you have to go and report it to the police if you feel threatened. So I did. I went to the police station, the MSU police, and I'm reporting that I'm showing the email, that someone threatened me in an email, and I have a class, this class, tomorrow morning, and I'm kind of scared to go because I have history of this student who took my online class last semester and got a 0. And it's kind of weird. So I go there, and the guy, the detective or the officer takes notes, like in this tiny little notebook, like in the movies, stereotypes, you know, like a little tiny notebook he had, and he's like writing down. And then at the end of our conversation, that really hurt me. He says, yeah, so where are you from? Love this question. I'm from Poland. Oh, really? So it might be a culture thing. I was like, oh my God, really? Like all that I told you just now, it can be anything, it can be gender thing, it can be age thing. Like if it was my professor who was male and older, do you think he would have written an email like this to him? You know, like, and then I was even more disappointed with how the institution like this handles this, because I don't know if you know, but if this happens to you, you have to call like a hotline, they call it, like a reporting student misconduct hotline, which is actually being outsourced to a third-party company. So I'm calling and I'm telling the lady what happened, and she's got no idea like about the structure of the university, because they are just being paid as a company. She's taking down notes, and then she says, I'm going to send this report to the president's office. This went to the, I kid you not, this went to the president's office the next morning, and the detective from the station calls me and says, we just got this report. So what happens, you call them, they send it to the president's office, and the president's office sends it back to us. So it kind of made a circle. It went back to the same person that I reported it to. And he says, yeah, I already called the student, and I was, he said, the student is very sorry. By the way, student is very sorry, and things like that. And then I was like, so what can I do to report this kind of situation? I mean, be culture or not being culture, it doesn't even matter. But, you know,
It could be a cultural thing.
yes.
The thing is, it doesn't exist.
But the fact that he said it, it really kind of made me think, you know, like if it's not the gender thing, if it's not the age thing, it's going to be the culture thing. It doesn't matter what you do. It's always going to be the culture thing. So if you are an international student, sooner or later in situations like this, the culture is going to come up. Someone is going to say, oh, he did this because it's a culture thing. He didn't understand the culture, you know, or I don't know, he was driving too fast and had an accident, or because Chinese students all have Porsche cars because it's a culture thing, you know. So it's always kind of coming back. I found this was really, like the whole experience was really linked to this very much so. And I thought, oh my, you know, like how can I'm not even talking about different cultures here, you know, I'm just coming here to report that someone threatened me, you know, verbally. So I just felt like this was very, again, dichotomy, you know, like you're not from here, so maybe you didn't get him. Like, he didn't mean it. He didn't mean what he said, you know, it wasn't what he meant. So, and you don't get it because you're from a different culture.
You know, I think where the cultural problem was, it was the problem of police culture versus culture. I think where the problem was, where I think the police tend to see things in very sort of black and white, you know, and
right.
It's different
Might be
than
true.
the culture, and not the Polish culture in which you live, but the academic type culture in which you live. I think that's where the culture issue came from.
What you need was a facilitator to work you through the interaction with that student.
Yeah, funny thing happened. The way it was solved, the student just disappeared from my class, and no one even told me about it. He was just like taken off my list and just disappeared. No one even informed me why, what happened, where he went, or anything. So that was, Yeah, maybe it's not a culture thing, I don't know, but it just kind of like felt very much like we are lost in translation between cultures here because we are not getting the message across, you know, what is going on. So anyways, I thank you very much, and if you can give those back to me, I really appreciate this. I will look at the feedback and work on those more, and if they are ready, when they are ready, I plan to actually create like a brochure out of those and publish them through the open educational resources, so that when they're ready, you know, whoever wants to use them would be able to use them. So that's like my plan with this later on, of course, when it's done, because it's going to take more time to fix things there. Thank you so much.